Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 647 of the Juicebox Podcast. Well, today's going to be a little different. Probably not that much different, but you'll see. I woke up one morning to an email inviting me to be on a podcast. And as you'll hear later, I usually don't answer those emails. But this one, well, there was something special about it. So today, you're going to hear an episode that is also simultaneously going to run on a different podcast. This is apparently quite a common thing for podcasters to do, although I have never done it. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. In just a moment, you're going to hear April from the Vagina Blog podcast interview me about how we manage Arden's periods with type 1 diabetes. And of course, at points, things go off the rails and I say weird stuff. So there's that to look forward to. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Dexcom, makers of the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. If you're using insulin, you should be using a Dexcom. Find out more at dexcom.com/juicebox. Fair warning before we start, if the word vagina makes you uncomfortable, I'd stop listening right now. Stop, I'm going to record on my end too. I didn't know we were starting. A lot of pressure. All right, now I'm good. Jesus.
Are you recording?
I'm literally sitting here wondering how I'm going to stop myself from just overtaking this conversation. Yes, I'm good.
You're going to be
fine. I'm recording. I'm good.
Guys, I am so excited today to be talking to Scott Benner. It is very rare that I have a male on the podcast, but I was just too excited to talk to Scott because, and this is very selfish of me, I wanted to create an episode around type 1 diabetes and everything that has to do with female body health. Scott has an incredible podcast called the Juicebox Podcast. It is single-handedly the most useful information I have found as a parent of a child with type 1 diabetes. So if you were listening to this episode, it's maybe going to be a little bit type 1 diabetes specific, but I super don't care because the type 1s need it. So Scott, welcome. Tell us how you got into this. Tell us who you are. Tell us about Juicebox.
April, wait, this is just going to be about diabetes. I have so many euphemisms for vaginas written down. I'm trying to...
Oh, no, don't you worry. We'll get into that.
Okay. Is that a pun? Are we starting off right away? Right?
Exactly.
Okay, because I tell every woman in my house, I'm like, at the end of your inspection, I don't know what you guys call it. I said you should ask the doctor. So on the whole, is everything okay? And I don't know why they don't do it, but
this is like when my best friend, I was going in for a stretch and sleep, which is when they like swipe your membrane when you're pregnant. And she's like, "Did you just say search and seizure?" And I was like, that's basically the right. Yep, that's what I'm getting done. Search and seizure.
Was she a cop?
No.
Oh, okay. Jeez. All right. Well, I have to start off by saying that I don't go on other people's podcasts. I get invited on a lot of them, and I to even say that I say no is polite. I just don't answer the emails usually. But I got yours, and I'm like, I need to know why I'm being invited on a podcast called the Vagina Blog. Because even if I was a woman, or if I even ever once had a vagina, I'm assuming it wouldn't even work anymore halfway because I'm 50. So, like, I
mean, you're getting up there.
Yeah, I mean, it would just really be good for peeing at this point, like, right? I mean, I don't know exactly how everything works, but
oh dear.
So I'm lying in bed. I'm looking through my emails, trying to get the energy to get out of bed, and I'm like, what is this? And I must have emailed you back immediately. I'm like, I need to talk to you on the phone. So I went from I usually don't respond to people to having a personal conversation with you because
which was fantastic because, and to share with you guys, like Scott had recently become my very best friend as a parent of a diabetic. there's very few resources that are like truly reliable and actually fully helpful. There's a lot of commiserating out in the world, the diabetic community, and the community is incredible. Like the diabetic community as a whole is incredible. It's a very special club to be a part of. But it was like a natural progression, I felt like, in our relationship, where it's like, of course I'm talking to you on the phone. You're my very best friend.
Is this just going to devolve into me making sure that you're mentally stable for the next hour?
Nah.
No? Okay.
I'm a parent of a type 1 child. Like, are any of us okay?
I was going to say, has that ship sailed already, or do you know that you're all right? So this is, I mean, must be fascinating for people listening. I'm not a woman on a show about, female reproductive parts, and I don't have diabetes, and I run a podcast about diabetes. I must seem like I must at first glance, people are like, oh, this is going to be a mansplaining episode of deep proportion, where I just talk about things in detail that I have no idea about. But
exactly.
Gosh, how did I end up doing this? Is that the question? I've talked so much, I forgot.
Yes. Tell us where you came from.
Okay. Is that? Are you trying to get me to say I came from my mom's vagina? I feel so much pressure to make everything. I'm just teasing you. I'm teasing you. So I have 2 children and a wife. And with that wife, I made the first baby. Everything seemed okay. And a few years later, we got all full of ourselves. And it was like, we're good at this. Let's just do it again. And we made another one. And that one came out fine. And we were like, boom, we're geniuses. And then 2 years into that, our second child, Arden, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So that was 2006 in the summertime. And back then, it's funny, blogs weren't really a thing, or they were just sort of starting to become a thing.
That was the beginning of the blog world, because that's about the time I kind of started dabbling as well. That was like, everyone had a blog spot, but we were all kind of trying to,
people were drifting out of, what was the one that was just basically animated pictures? MySpace. And it was either Blogspot or it was, what's the other one? Look how old I am. Anyway, WordPress, you have it. And so my daughter gets diabetes, and the first year is a real slog. It doesn't go well. Her A1C is in the 8s. I have a general feeling most days that I'm killing her. I'm putting her to bed at the end of the night and like talking to myself as I'm walking out of the room. Like, God, I hope she's going to be alive in the morning. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Everything's terrible.
Which is that's so real. Like I like when I listened to that episode that you had talked about that exact feeling, I was like, that describes it perfectly. Like, well, they're probably going to die tonight. I did the best I could. I can go to sleep knowing that we really tried. And it will completely make sense when they're alive in the morning.
No technology to speak of. Now there are continuous glucose monitors, there are pumps, algorithms that help you. I don't want to give anybody who doesn't understand type 1 the feeling that it's just easy, but you can, if you have the money and the insurance, you can at least kind of see what's happening, which is valuable, right? So
and sleep at night.
Yeah. No, I have slept more since the technology. Anyway, on her 1-year anniversary, as it was coming up, I started getting overwhelmed with the idea of like helping research, I guess is how it felt. Like I was like, well, I'm not a doctor. I'm not smart. I'm not going to figure this out. Like maybe I can push money towards people who might help her. And I didn't know how to do that. So I started writing an email. Like I would like send emails out to people like, just like, this is what diabetes is about. And it was kind of lame. And then I tried to raise some money in the first year. And I think I raised like $1,500. And I was like, oh God, I'm bad at this too. I can't take care of diabetes and I don't know how to raise money. It's hard. It wasn't easy. So on the first anniversary, I found a piece of software on my computer. I'm a Mac user, and it was called iWeb. And it promised the magic of being able to put my thoughts onto the internet and to give it a landing page kind of thing is how they talked about it. So I made this little blog, and I started blogging about what it was like for Arden to have diabetes. And then I used my email, which I maybe was reaching, 300 or 400 people that I knew in the whole world. And I said, I'm going to do a day of diabetes where I'm going to email you every time I touch her so that you can understand what it's like. And that information will also be on the blog. Well, I'm going to say by about 2:00 in the afternoon, I started feeling bad because No one had asked for these emails, and it's not like I asked them to opt into it. And B, I just was like, God, they've got the point already. And if they don't care. And like a month later, I got an email from this lady living in England who I don't know and could not in any way figure out my connection to her. And she's like, hey, your blog's really helping my family.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't even know what she's talking about. Like, I didn't think I didn't think of myself as having a blog. Like, I didn't think of any of that. And it went on like that for quite some time because unlike WordPress or the other stuff, there was no SEO. It was all word of mouth if it got around at all. And I put no effort into making it bigger. And I think something about not having an eye on making it amazing let me build it very organically instead. And it's all word of mouth. So unlike, nowadays where all you young people, I'm just kidding. I just feel really old. You're like, people are like, I'm going to start an Instagram and, I'll be a trainer by Friday or, and I just was like, I don't care. Like if this reaches people and helps them, right on. And if it doesn't, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not trying to make money with it. I don't want it to be a business. And I think
you were truly sharing like, look, I'm already trying to stumble into this knowledge. I might as well just share what I have, that was like the beauty. There was no like, all the pictures have to be perfect. There was no like, I have to push this. Like, what's my SEO strategy? Like, it was those early days of blogging were like so delicious and naive and like really altruistic.
Well, I did it for the right reason. And there was no real way to make money with it anyway. It's not the world that you imagine today. So there was no like eye on the prize kind of feeling. And I had learned from other people by watching that if they got a popular blog, then they would make the deadly mistake of shining it up and making it look corporate. And then people didn't like it anymore. And I was like, so you built this thing by coming to people saying like, look, this is me. I'm in my underwear in my living room typing this to you. Yep. And then you made it look like a pharma website. And like, and now you're wondering why people don't read it anymore, or you stop saying what you thought or whatever. So I was just always very honest. And the truth is the first number of years of it were just me it was very like raw nerve. Like something would happen. Mainly that thing would be bad. I would share it online and other people would say, oh, that happens to us too, which I guess that was nice because it gave people a feeling of camaraderie. But after a while, I started thinking, this isn't really valuable beyond that. And wouldn't I like it for it to be valuable beyond that? Like the way I usually say it is, it's nice to know at 2:00 in the morning, you're not alone because there are other people out in the world fighting with diabetes too. But wouldn't it be better if that didn't happen to you at 2:00 in the morning? Like, let's talk about how to stop it from happening and stop commiserating over it and saying, oh, this is what diabetes is. And it's just what it is. So I hate that term. I hate it when people say, oh, that's just diabetes, because it makes it feel like it's out of your hands. And sometimes it is, but not as much as people think. Dexcom. That's right, we're here to talk about the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor and all the things that it will bring to your life. Here are some of them in no particular order. Calm. Data. A sense that things aren't out of control. Is that enough? Do you need more? All right, I'll give you more. Hold on. You or a loved one has type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, and you want to see the speed and direction of your blood sugar. So you get yourself a Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. Yeah, put it on, and the next thing you know, right there on your Dexcom receiver or on your Android or iPhone, you're looking at your blood sugar. I know, right? It's cray-cray. It's constant, like the number's always there. It also indicates to you the direction your blood sugar is moving. Is it stable? Is it rising slowly? Is it rising quickly? Falling slowly, falling, etc. You understand the direction. So you've got the number, you've got the direction, and there's this beautiful graph that shows you where you've been. So you understand kind of the backstory of your day. People can follow your Dexcom. I am following my daughter's. I have picked up my iPhone and I'm opening it. Arden's blood sugar is 116 and it's stable. So that means it's not falling at an appreciable rate. But if I look at the graph, I can see that she's coming down because we just changed a pump and her blood sugar got a little sticky for a minute during the pump change, and we've been pushing it down since then. So while I believe that she's not falling at any great rate, I do expect this number to keep drifting over the next hour or so, just based on what I'm seeing and my experiences using a Dexcom. Now, if that's not enough, I don't know what to tell you. I think you should head over right now to dexcom.com/juicebox and find out how to get started. At the very least, check out that Hello Dexcom offer they have, because you may be eligible for a free 10-day trial of the Dexcom G6. What did I just say? Free. Go find out if you're eligible, because you want to see this. You know, if you try it out and you don't like it, that's cool. But I think you're going to fall in love. Fall in love with the comfort and security that comes with seeing the speed and direction of blood sugar. It just opens up a whole new world. And I would sing a whole new world, but I believe it's copyrighted, so I can't. But I could reenact my favorite scene from Aladdin. Princess Jasmine. I'm kidding. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Head over and check it out. Things that I described in this ad are, of course, the results that we've achieved here, and yours may vary, but I'll tell you what's not going to vary. Seeing that data, understanding how insulin and food affects blood sugar, that's a game changer. That is absolutely magical. Like a young man flying on a carpet. See what I did there? No one thought that was going to tie together. Not even me. Listen, if you can do it, a Dexcom is going to make a big difference. I think you're really going to like it. I hope you check it out. There are links in the show notes to Dexcom and all of the sponsors. Those links are also available at juiceboxpodcast.com.
Something that's been so helpful from you, though, I think it takes a certain level of bravery and brazenness to be able to be like, look, you went and sat down with your doctor. They decided to do X, Y, and Z. I'm actually living this crap day to day. Let me give you some actual real world advice. Because I think I get caught up in like, oh, I don't want people to come at me later and be like, that was terrible advice and this is medical. Because even the realm of women's health is as much the Wild West as the realm of type 1 diabetes. Like I very much saw this, and like even listening to your podcast, I love that you guys will so crystal clear be like, look, we did this and we tried this and this problem had this. And I think a lot of people tiptoe around that because they're scared. And so I love that you don't tiptoe. I love that you say how it is. I love that you say, look, this is what we're doing and this is what actually works. It's the same approach I've really tried to have to like female body health as a whole, because we tiptoe too much and we don't actually share what's really like we're really thinking or what we're really like, well, I don't want to be mean to the doctors, or I don't want to go against whatever the current medical wisdom is, but like if the medical wisdom isn't there and your doctors aren't actually managing a kid, they don't really know. And it's the same with endometriosis. It's the same with PCOS. It's the same with like a lot of these women's disorders. And so I loved your brazenness in so many ways that you've just been like, no, this is just what we're doing. And it probably could totally work for you.
Oh, April, you're nice. I mean, I'm fantastic, but we need to get past that. What I'm saying is what I'm trying to say. I agree with you. And it's also a different thing now in the world where content, you have to have something up constantly. I'll tell you right now, if anybody anybody ever wants to do this and thinks they're going to be successful at it, here's my analogy. Take a stone, hold a lighter up to it. The stone will get hot. The second you take away the lighter, the stone will be freezing cold again. And that is trying to be relevant online. If you are not constantly holding the flame to the stone, you will go out and people will forget about you and go find you a hot stone. And because of that, there's such a push to get content out that people don't wait to find out if what they're saying is valuable. They just like, I had a thought, here's my thought. And I don't do that. So if, again, being able to build slowly through the blog, I was able to build kind of a system for managing insulin. And then at one point I said to my wife, I have a way of doing this and it just works. And I think it would work for most people, if not all of them, because it's on such a basic distilled level. We're just talking about figuring out how insulin works in your body and then applying it to the things you're eating. And so I taught myself through the blog, and then I distilled it. And I kept taking it down until the thoughts were so small that they were basically t-shirt slogans. Because at 2 o'clock in the morning, when you're fighting with your kids' low blood sugar, you don't need to start like pulling up, something you read online and rereading it to figure it out. Like, you need my stupid voice to say 5 words in your head that triggers an entire memory for you that you can put into action very quickly, right?
You don't want to be pulling out the physician's Dex reference of diabetes. No. You just want someone to be like, hey, trust that what you think will happen.
Right. Or,
you're Scott, my new best friend.
Exactly. You're correcting a low blood sugar. The blood sugar's 50. You give the kid 40 carbs, and then people just go back to bed. Well, some of those 40 carbs need insulin now, because after the blood sugar's corrected, it's going to start going back up again, because now you've put in these carbohydrates and not compensated for them with insulin. And so I started telling people, you should trust that what you know is going to happen is going to happen. And that's not something that me and 7 people sat in a room and figured out to say. I just blurted it out while I was talking one day, and then I can see what sticks to people. Like, so I wrote that blog. I still have it, and I do put stuff on it, but I wrote that blog earnestly until I started this podcast in 2015. This podcast is like, it's over, and I don't do like when people, and no offense to anybody listening, but like when you all say like, I have a season of a podcast up and it has 10 episodes in it, I laugh at that. That's 2 weeks of a podcast. Like, you gotta go, So I just thought, all right, I've got to blend these ideas together. I want to help people. And I really should be clear, because I'm from the East Coast and I could come off as flippant. All of this to me is about helping people live better. Like that, that it's become a thing that's a business, like that I send out invoices for ads and things like that is secondary for me. And so I hold on to that core tenet of helping people, but I understand that if you take the flame off the stone, you're not going to help people anymore. So you have to.
I played this exact same game, and it's all those fine lines of like, am I maintaining this in a way that I can continue to go at this speed while also like helping everyone. So I'm assuming if someone has listened this far, they probably have some interest in type 1 and want to know, like, let's get to the good stuff. Wait, so let's talk about this. You are managing a teenage girl. And so you are familiar with what it looks like to manage someone with a menstrual cycle. Yeah. And I even love, I brought up this to you earlier, like you just barely did an episode around masturbation that I had not even thought about how masturbation could affect blood sugar levels, which is really like when it comes to managing a type 1 and being a parent of a type 1, like, and even maybe being like anyone listening that has type 1, maybe that isn't even included into them. Like, oh, All right. So let's start with menstrual cycle.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. You're saying, stop chit-chatting, Scott. Let's get to the meat. I understand. All right. I'll talk forever. You want to make this 3 hours? We do this, no problem. So let's be clear. First of all, during the masturbation episode, I did not speak about my daughter. I just because
no.
I'm teasing you.
But you do have a teenage child.
She's 17. She's going
to be a young adult someday. And
she's 17. She's had diabetes since she was 2, and so it kind of goes back to the tenets of the podcast, which are, I think, one of the mistakes that people with diabetes can make. And I want to be clear so I don't sound like an ass. I think that one of the reasons I'm good at talking about managing insulin and type 1 diabetes in general is because I have a third-party perspective that's really a first-person heart, and I can be dispassionate about it because I'm not the one in the panic situation. If someone's blood sugar is crashing, I understand all the emotions and the inability to even maybe handle your own body as your blood sugar gets lower, but I don't have to have that. I'm kind of an observer, so I can see what works in a situation and apply it. So for me, when I tell people, I mean, if you're still listening and you care about diabetes, here's what I think. I think you get your basal insulin right, You learn to pre-bolus your meals correctly. You learn the difference in the impacts of foods. How to put it simply is that, eating a handful of popcorn, even if it's 11 carbs, might impact you differently than having 11 carbs of papaya, right? So there's the glycemic load and glycemic index of foods. You have to understand the difference between them so that you can use the proper amount of insulin and not just do that thing where, oh, it's 10 carbs. I don't understand why it didn't work. And then after that, I think it's about staying flexible. And I think people have trouble with that, and they can get very mathematical about diabetes, which I don't think works very well. And then
I struggle with that.
Yep. And then they get,
because I'm like, this is supposed to be this. There's a lot of supposed to in the mathematical.
Yeah, there's no supposed to. And so and then the next thing that happens to them is they get caught up in the why. So
oh, same.
Yeah.
And offended by it.
Why can't I figure out why this is happening? So to me, I don't think like if you jump out of an airplane with a parachute on and it doesn't open, you don't go, well, this is a fine, how do you do? The guy told me there was a parachute back here that worked. You start wondering if you have another chute. Like, is there one on the front? How does this thing work? Right. So people why themselves right into the ground.
Oh, and waste so much time. Just correct and move on.
Yes.
But it is in the moment is so frustrating of like, I did everything right. What is going on? Why? And then the figuring out the why. In the meantime, just correct them and
I don't know why some people's brains work that way, but mine doesn't. And I don't know why some people have trouble, saying out loud, my doctor doesn't give me great advice, but I don't have trouble with that. I don't care about anything that would impede my daughter from having a less than healthy life. So, right. So I apply that idea to the menstruation part because listen, I don't know what it's like to be a woman, but from a third party perspective, it seems to be an unholy dumpster fire every once in a while. Like what happens to you guys, it's horrible, and, muscle aches and headaches and joint pain. And I'm
messy.
Tired and everything's horrible. And like, oh my God, I need another pad. I need this. I'm 15 years old and I don't want to put a tampon in, but I want to go sweat. Like, I don't understand any of it. God bless you. Okay. And like, it's amazing. So what I noticed is that there are times of the month that my daughter needs more insulin and there are times of the month that she needs less. And I don't argue about that in my own head. I just accept it and handle it with the same way I would handle everything with diabetes. So I'm guessing something about ovulating gets your hormones rolling around. Those hormones then cause some issues with using insulin because you see it with boys, right? When boys grow and they have a hormone influx, they have different insulin needs. Poor girls, as soon as they start getting their periods, almost immediately. For Arden, it wasn't like day one, but a few months. I feel like she had like a training wheels period for a couple of months.
Totally.
Right?
Yep.
That makes sense?
Yep.
And then I started realizing like, okay, well, when you see these things happen, that's an indication that she needs more insulin. Stop worrying about why and move the settings so that now the settings meet the need, right? Just meet the need. And then as you see it drift away, and for Arden, it's usually when here's where I get stuck, man, on your podcast. What do we call it? Is it the event? When does it, like, the flow? I don't know what to say.
When menstruation occurs.
Listen, when whoever invented people, I'm going to just guess it was the end of the day, right, April? And whether you want to believe in God or, the Big Bang or whatever, somebody was sitting there and they're like, what do we do to indicate they're not pregnant? And the guy's like, I don't know. I want to go home for dinner. Like, you figure it out. And then, like, the guy, like, in the office got to decide. And he was like, I don't like my mom much. We should make them bleed out of their vaginas. And, like, just terrible. So when that thing happens, over the next 36 hours or so, her insulin needs start to drift back to where they are.
So I have a question about this. Because obviously I've been listening to your podcast, so I know Arden is on birth control, which suppresses ovulation and flatlines all your hormones. Have you noticed a difference coming from an ovulating, cycling teenage female into now a completely flatline, no longer ovulating, no longer menstruating female?
Yeah, the insulin needs are more stable again, but you can still see them. The difference is still
interesting.
Yeah, just a little bit. So it's like it's not as much of a change, but it's still a change.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be a little worse now. It can go back and forth a little bit during her period sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to start separating things out. Like this is when...
Well, because she would be going... Because like, is she on like a pill?
Yeah, wait, actually, that's been a whole... Do you want to hear about that? That's been a dilemma.
Yes.
So
that's why we're here.
That's why we're here? If somebody would have told me that, I would have led with this. I'm just teasing. So...
No, you wouldn't have.
No, I would still... If you didn't run me over 10 minutes ago and try to get me back on track, I'd still be pontificating about something.
I know.
Yeah, it's okay. Hey, listen, you laugh if you want. You go ahead and try to make a podcast if you're not chatty. It ain't easy.
I know.
So... Arden starts getting... How did it start? I'm going to guess it...
Like that, it's a withdrawal bleed. So you're withdrawing from a synthetic hormone. So I could see where the insulin needs would still change with the menstruation because you're going through withdrawal from hormone, like synthetic hormones.
It can be a little more erratic during the bleeding. But so here's what happened. She starts to get her period. I forget how old, if I'm being honest.
That's fine.
A number of months into it, she starts experiencing, this is fascinating, a nosebleed. One big nosebleed almost every 30 days. Out of nowhere. Never happened to her before. We're in a movie. It's 2019. We're seeing the Joker. It's like 15 minutes left in the movie. He's about to kill Robert De Niro. Sorry, spoilers. And I don't think anybody listening to this podcast is like, oh no, I was going to watch the Joker. And she looks over at me and she goes, what's going on? And blood is pouring out of her nose. And that, in my mind, looking back in hindsight, was the beginning of this whole mishigas, which is, it's a Yiddish word. It means a disaster. And so we didn't notice that the nosebleeds were happening monthly at first. And then she started talking about her period was very heavy. And then before we knew it, she was dying. Like, I mean, like it's an over exaggeration, but she was like literally falling apart. And for months, like she'd get home from school, pass out on the countertop. Like I have photos of Arden sleeping on a countertop, like with her head forward, sitting in a chair, just couldn't hold her head up. And it wasn't until we realized that her ferritin level had dropped very far.
Yeah.
And then we got her an infusion of iron and she just came right back up. Like leaving a flower out in the heat and then watering it again. And you're like, this will never come back. And then the next day you're like, oh my God, it's all full and green again. She comes right back up, took about a month. But somehow we didn't put that together with the bleeding. So then she just drained back out again. And then then I said to my wife, I'm like, holy shit, this is, I'm sorry. I don't know if you curse on here.
No, you're fine.
Okay. This is about her period where she's losing too much blood. So we got her on a pill. They put her on low estrogen. Low didn't help anything, but they made her do it for 3 months to be sure. Then they moved her to low estrogen, which seemed to be magical. Nosebleed stopped, period regulated. And when I say regulated, Arden was getting her period 11 days straight, 2-day break, and then it was coming right back again. Over and over. And all that stuff that we talked about before, the tiredness and the muscle aches and just
anemia. Yeah, totally.
It wouldn't stop. And so she's just like melting into a pile. And so we thought, oh, this is perfect. We got it. Now, 2 months ago, she starts saying, I can't eat meat. And I have no idea if this is going to be about this or not, right? But this is me thinking through it. And then suddenly I can't stomach meat turned into I'm hungry, but I don't have a flavor for anything. Like I can't imagine what would taste good, right? And just last week, Arden and I were at her OB's appointment because I've been a stay-at-home dad for over 20 years and I go to a lot of things that a lot of guys don't do. And we're sitting we're sitting in the office and we're trying to figure it out. And I think the doctor's going to move her to Yaz. Is that right? Different pill.
Yeah.
And then we realized through talking more, it's possible that our pharmacy moved her to generic about the same time we think that her thing with her appetite started. So we're still going to try the Yaz anyway, because she's still having some weird acne that the doctor's like, with this pill, you should not be having any acne. So she's going to switch you around a little bit. But I think we might look back and find out it's just the generic. And by the way, the nosebleeds came back.
Interesting. Because really, the generic's supposed to be pretty much the same thing. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And so who knows? But I'm a little obviously I don't seem trepidatious because I just talk, but during trying to teach myself about birth control pills, I learned that there seems to be two very specific camps online about it. There are people who share their experience with their birth control pills, and then there are people who yell at them, it seems like, for seeming like they're talking people out of using or shaming. I don't know. I'm 50. I don't really care what the hell all you do. Doesn't matter to me.
Totally.
Yeah. But I'm telling you, this is what happened here. I don't know exactly if this is right or not, but the way I think about it is, if I just said something that anyone can have a light bulb moment for, and it might help them, then good. And by the way, if this isn't you, then keep moving. You know what I mean? Like,
totally.
That's all.
No, it's so here at the Vagina blog, the official stance on birth control is it has a time and a place. It's one of those things that, like, unfortunately, we've presented it as like a multivitamin to people. Like, it's just no big deal. Just take this, it'll fix everything. And the reality is it has its own side effects.
Yeah.
And it's essentially putting your entire hormonal system at rest. So it suppresses everything. And it's frustrating because, like, the medical community uses terms like regulate, but it's not regulating. It's just turning that whole cycle off. So what you're doing is you are taking a medication that suppresses everything, and then you are having a withdrawal from that medication that causes bleeding that looks like a period. And so it feels like, oh, I'm regulating. But there's a time and place for all of this. Like, even knowing all that, like, I was on birth control for many years because I just really could not find a great way to not get pregnant. And didn't want to have all the babies.
April, prior
and
to
with
this,
what she's going through as a teenager, I mean, that's the other thing that's tricky. Like, you definitely have some bleeding issues that are serious.
Yeah.
Well, so maybe while you wade through that and get a diagnosis, this is a great Band-Aid.
I'm going to be honest with you. Prior to this, with my daughter, my knowledge of birth control pills were that I dated a girl in high school whose breasts were amazing because she was on birth control pills. And that is all I knew. That's all I knew about it. And honestly, like, I didn't think about it. I didn't know about it. I just know that one day I had a girlfriend, and the next day I had a girlfriend whose boobs were better than they were the day before. So that's all I knew, right? And, now I'm seeing everything you said and how valuable that could be for people. And I understand better that it's not the way I was led to believe, which is, you just can't get pregnant, and it makes your period very regulated. I'm making air quotes. I can tell you this, that I to the best of my knowledge, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, my daughter's not sexually active. And
I mean, we don't need to go into
no
history,
that's not what I'm doing. That's not what I'm doing. If she was and she wanted to use a pill, that would be up to her. I'd be okay with that. I'm saying, to your point, like, this seemed like a reach to us doing this. This was not like an easy thing. We were like, oh, we'll just try this now. Like, it was hard to get to because as we read about it and we started realizing more of the impacts of it, it did seem really serious. Now, for a number of months, it felt like it was saving her life. And now we feel like she's either going to starve to death or bleed to death. We can't figure out which it's going to be first,
I have to tell you, my Mirena caused irritable bowel and messed up my appetite. As soon as I took out that IUD, it all was like right back to completely normal. But it's one of those things, like, that's a side effect of some of the birth controls. You just kind of have to, you have to weigh. You always have to weigh the pros and the cons on those and go, okay, is this, which one's worse? And I'm going to go with bleeding to death being worse.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly. So let me catch up for a second. You just mentioned an IUD. Is that the thing that looks like the flux capacitor out of the Back to the Future car? Like, it's like,
yes.
Okay. All right. Good.
All up in my uterus.
I know what it is. All right. Look at me. You would think they just put like a little guy in there with boxing gloves that could beat up the sperms. It'd be much easier.
That's what it is.
Yeah. So, again, 50-year-old guy talking about periods. I don't know what I'm talking about half the time.
You're doing great.
Well, no, but I mean, it's either does anyone else, I guess, is my point. And you just have to, like, dive in and figure it out. And much like with the diabetes, I only know as much as I know about it now because I cared about my daughter and I wanted to figure it out. And that's the same thing with this. Like, I couldn't just see her be like that. Just,
Totally. You just hop back on a different roller coaster and you're like, okay, Here we go.
I had like a terrible view in my head of like, the pre-internet life where people would just be like, that's my daughter. She's tired all the time. You know what I mean? Like, that's horrible.
Absolutely.
Right. Just bad. So
yeah,
I'm not going to know what happens. She starts the new pill, in a week or so. But back to the insulin stuff. Yes. While she's been on the birth control pills, getting on them was a rough ride. Like her levels changed a fair amount. And then,
yes, that's what I was wondering. Yeah.
And then I started figuring out the pattern, and then I was able to change her settings to meet the needs. And we know what it looks like to switch gears when you basically have to switch gears about twice a month, going into it, changing, and then coming out of it again. And I know what people get scared of. They're like, well, I don't know, like, how do I turn this up if I'm not sure it's going to happen? But to that, I'd say it's happening every month. Like, you trust that, what's going to happen is going to happen. And you just kind of get ahead of it. Because that ends up being what happens is people, they wait, the blood sugars get out of whack. Then suddenly they're chasing these horrible roller coasters up and down, up and down, up and down. And that's just not the way insulin works. If, you use insulin.
I just keep learning that fun lesson over and over again. It's great.
Let me say this, and then let me ask you a question. So, in my mind, insulin you use now is for later, timing wise. But more appropriately, if you're trying to think about it, you have to think about that the insulin I used before is impacting right now. And I know it's the same thing, but it's not when you're thinking about it. It's more important to know that your blood sugar might be getting low or high right now because of a decision you made 2 hours ago. Because if you don't know that and you're always fighting the fight as the fight's happening, you can never stop the fight from reoccurring again. You're always behind. In my mind, you're chasing it. And only like ninja level people with insulin know how to like stop the chase in its tracks, which I do try to explain to people on the show. And I think we do a pretty good job, actually. What is your experience?
Oh, you do a great job. That has gotten significantly better since listening to the Juicebox podcast. What blew my mind was we would see, so my daughter loves to eat and not tell us that she ate. She's 9. So it's a nightmare. We've talked about it all day, every day, that she can't do that, but she continues to, which is, we're working on it. Anyway, that's probably a parenting issue. Well, maybe a supervision issue.
I would say this. But may I think it is parenting in as much as that it's going to take you a long time to teach kids something. So I think I was a stay-at-home dad for a long time. I'm basically a lady. I'm missing a couple of internal parts, and I could probably be a mom. But
my husband and I have switched off back and forth our entire marriage as to who's the stay-at-home parent. Like, I love that you've done this and like had that experience.
I quit my job in around Christmas in 1999. So I haven't, if you made me get up and go to work today, I'd cry, just so you know. Like, I'd chain myself to something heavy in the house. I'd be like, you cannot make me leave this house.
Not putting pants on unless I want to.
I will shave when I want to shave and not before. I realized, by the way, about 5 or 6 years into being a stay-at-home dad, that I would have this big crazy beard and women would always be wearing sweatpants in the winter. And I was like, none of us are shaving.
No, there's no need. It's winter.
It seemed unfair.
You gotta stay warm.
Yeah, it seemed unfair that they could hide it, and I look scruffy, but not the point. I think you have to repeat
she'll hit
things.
High numbers, and what surprised me, because we would always give her this big correction, that she would crash and immediately go low, like, an hour or two later, and it would be this whole like, oh, we got to correct now. What is weird is I will now give her that same correction and crank up her basal, and she comes in smooth for a landing.
Yeah. So you figured out a thing that worked for you.
Like, what in the world? I give her more insulin and she doesn't crash as hard.
It's the timing of it. So you have to line up. You have to line up the impact of the carbs with the action of the insulin. They have to happen at the same time, and they kind of create this tug of war that no one can win. And that's really what using insulin is to me. If you put in insulin 5 minutes before you eat, Insulin doesn't work that way. So it's not going to be active in doing what it wants to do. The food's going to go in and start hitting sooner. Now the blood sugar's flying up and the insulin's basically still like off on the side, stretching its legs and getting ready. And before you know it, even if you started with a great blood sugar of 90, you're 150, you're 200, it's flying up. And then all of a sudden the insulin's like, I'm ready to run. And then it jumps into the fight. It's way too late now because you used enough insulin for, say to cover 30 grams of carbs at an 89 blood sugar, but now the blood sugar's 210 and it's rising. So there's momentum. There's the numbers change. You do not have enough insulin anymore. All that insulin goes in, it tries. It can't really do anything. And then you're high and you're looking at it. And you're like, oh, I'm going to have to do something. So you put in more insulin. Then the food gets digested out of the system, stops impacting the blood sugar. All the insulin's left behind and you plummet, right? But if you just put in the right amount of insulin a little sooner, so that as the insulin begins to peak, as the food begins to impact, it sort of just becomes, it's an impasse. It's, just imagine two sides pulling on a rope, but both are exactly the same strength and they can't move the rope. And that's when you see those steady lines on people's graphs, that's what they have happening. They have a balance of the need of insulin and the amount of insulin, and it's a very good balance. And that's it.
So here's a question coming back to menstruation. Were you ever able to autopilot? Were you ever able to like dive into your pumps system and say, okay, we know on week 1 of her menstrual cycle and week 2, or like the first half and the second half, like her basal programs need to be this and her basal programs need to be that. Yeah. Were you ever able to get into like an autopilot situation with it?
That's what we do. Yeah. I mean, I don't listen, if you're using insulin, and especially if you have type 1, and you're waiting every 3 months for your doctor to make an adjustment to your settings, you're always going to be lost. It's a thing that's happening right now. And you need to address it in the moment. So yeah, I mean, I've been changing Arden settings since I figured that out. I mean, a very long time ago. Like I said earlier, in the beginning couple years, I was just doing what I was told, and it was not, it was not going well. And then I started seeing things, putting 2 and 2 together, recognizing very quickly, I need to be in charge of when this insulin goes in and how much it is. And, and since then I would never not make an adjustment if I needed one. Now you can over adjust. Like you can't just turn dials for the sake of turning dials. It needs to be a little purposeful, a lot purposeful. But that's the kind of stuff we talk about in the show, so that people can understand.
Yeah. Well, and and anyone listening to this who wants to know more about that, I mean, you have great episodes on stopping the arrows, on how to get your basal right. Like basal's really like, if that's off, it's off. Like, and so you've got great resources for that. Something else I wanted to ask you about, and I mean, I feel bad that we're like really just talking about Arden. You're also like over this entire community that you can draw from too. But have you seen insulin resistance since introducing birth control? Because for some people, using birth control can cause insulin resistance.
So I don't talk about insulin resistance like that because I think it puts an idea in people's heads that there's a magical thing happening that causes them to use more insulin and they can't know why it exists. So I understand that insulin resistance is a thing, but I think it makes people think about it the wrong way. So do you have hormones that cause you to need more insulin? Yes. But that's not insulin resistance. That's just, it's a need is how I think about it. And I know you know what I'm saying, but I just think it's incredibly important to be clear because it puts people into those thoughts of, oh, well, that's just diabetes. There's nothing I can do about it. I get insulin resistant once in a while. But that's not true. If you can step back and take a macro enough view, there are repetitive natures to what's happening to you. And so if 3 days before you ovulate, something happens, well, then that's about what happens. I mean, if you want to think about it as insulin resistance, you can. But I just think about it as on that day, you need more insulin, or on those grouping of days.
So you haven't seen an overall rise in like, oh, suddenly since being on birth control, her insulin needs have been greater overall. Like I'm talking like there's an overall, like, so I have PCOS, which is an insulin disorder, essentially. And so birth control, when you have PCOS, can make your insulin resistance worse. So you're even more resistant to the insulin that your body's making. And so I wondered how that affected type 1s.
Well, at the time, yes, her insulin needs went up. Her her basal rate needs went up, not significantly, maybe from
not significantly
0.8 to 1 or 1.1. Like right now she's in, because this pill suddenly not working for her, she just suddenly broke through and had bleeding, like she got a period like 8 days into this pill pack, which is, we're like, oh great.
Horrible.
Now it's not even doing this part, and so, that happened, and I watched her needs go to like placebo week. And so we changed a little bit, but not a lot. Her sites have been, I don't know if I'm right about this or not, but I think sometimes during her period, her sites don't last quite as long. And I don't know if that's an overall feeling of the body just being, in a mess, and maybe it's in a healing process. Like it
can cause inflammation. So typically menstruation and even withdrawal bleeding can cause the body to go into an inflammatory state. That would totally make sense that the cannula would be that much more irritable.
Yeah. So we, we're a little more on top of changing pumps. Like in that second day, in the end of the second day, you're like, I'm not getting what I expect out of this insulin. We might jump off of it a little sooner. That happens a little more during her period than not. But it doesn't. I think that the problem with this, and maybe a lot of things, is that people want like concrete light switch answers to things, and health just doesn't work that way. So you have to step back and you have to see what's happening and then be proactive and do something about it. You can't just say, you have PCOS, so it's going to be that way, the way it is for you, for everybody, because that's not the case. And diabetes is, is similar. Life is similar, right? Like it would be nice if there was just a book of answers, but it doesn't work that way.
We all have totally different bodies. Well, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode with you is just to kind of create almost a list of like suggestions. Like I've noticed this in my community. I've noticed this, like with my own daughter managing, I've noticed some of this, or we've seen some of this, like just a guideline of like, if you have type 1 and you're menstruating, it could potentially look like this for you. Be on the lookout. Look for your cycle. What patterns are emerging? Which is really a gospel I preach all the time. Let's look at your cycle and see what patterns we can find. And so I think for a type 1, that's that much more important.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to likely happen to you. And maybe for some people it doesn't. Or maybe some people are MDI and, not to get like too in the weeds, but there are some people who are MDI who aren't great about pre-bolusing, and they aren't great about carb counting. So their endos will set them up with a heavier basal rate to sort of like try to lay a blanket over the sins that might happen during the day, right?
Yeah.
So maybe because of that, like who knows? Maybe because of that, you have more basal than you need. Maybe your needs go up because of your period and your appetite goes down. So you eat less and you don't notice that some of that extra basal you were using for food is now being used for hormones and impact from your period. Yeah. Like I can't tell you all the things that might happen. The variables are like, they're mind numbing sometimes. Like
Scott, I brought you on here to tell everyone everything about everything.
Well, I am telling you, here's the answer. Stay flexible. Stop. Don't ask why. Don't ask why. Meet the need. That's it. Like, I mean, I
love that.
I joke with Jenny sometimes. So for people who don't know, I had a woman named Jenny Smith come on my show one time. She's diabetes for like 30 years or more. She's a CDE, a certified diabetes educator. She's a nutritionist. She's delightful. And she's very smart. And I just had her
fantastic.
I had her on as a guest one time, and I couldn't get her out of my head. I was like, I need to have her back on the show. So I had her one more time as a guest, and I had the same feeling again. And then I told her one day, I didn't know her, like try to imagine, like I sent her an email and I was like, I want to take all the little parts of like management that I talked about and I want to distill them, because the one thing my podcast is conversational. So my goal when you're listening to an episode is that it might be entertaining, it might be fun. You're going to learn a couple of things and your hour will feel pretty well used. And that that episode will build onto another one that will build on another one, kind of makes a tapestry of understanding. But I didn't have any specific, like this episode's about setting your basal insulin, because my brain doesn't work that way. So I said to Jenny, I'm like, I have these tenets. I would like to put them in their own place. And she came on and helped me make the Diabetes Pro Tip series that exists inside the podcast now. And it went so well that I was like, would you also help me define terms? Like, would you talk about variables? Like, so she's on a lot, but she really is, she's a lovely person. She's just a guest. Like she's not an employee. She doesn't like, you know what I mean? It's just a wonderful person. And anyway,
but that's the diabetes world. It's like, oh, can I help? Of course I'll help. We'll figure it out.
It really is. It really is.
I love it.
Yeah. So I said to her one day, you know, I want to do one about periods too, like about, you know, menstrual cycle. Cause we have like pregnancy series. We have like all this stuff.
Yeah.
And we're talking back and forth. And I said, you know, the truth of this is that this whole thing is not really a podcast. Like none of it is. Like I should have one 15-minute episode that says, get your basal right, pre-bolus your meals, learn the different glycemic impacts of food, stay flexible, see you later. You know what I mean? But
trust that what you know will happen will happen.
Right. But it doesn't work that way. You can't just say something to someone and they go, oh, okay. And that's it. And not just for this, for anything. And so that's why delivering content this way, I mean, the blog was popular and I'd get a note, you know, every couple of weeks, like this blog's really helping me. But I mean, like, it's weird to say out loud because content providers say these things a lot when they aren't necessarily true. But I hear from probably a dozen to I'd say 15 people a day about what the podcast does for them.
It's intimate. You're in their ears. Like right now, when people are listening to this and they're part of our conversation, they love, like, I love hearing the stories. I love learning the lessons through the stories. I love hearing that other people are going through the same things that I'm going through.
Yeah.
But even like the episodes where you had Jenny, that was the beginning of me finally being like, oh, I need to do this. I need to try that. I didn't even think about this. My doctor never covered that. I didn't know what those acronyms stood for.
Yeah. It's just, and you can't just give it away in a sentence. It's not a blog post. Mm-hmm. The blogs was nice. It didn't work right. You know, trying to do it on Instagram, that's a fool's errand. You're not gonna be able to do it that way.
It's a good time, let me tell you.
And even doing this, the kind of maybe underappreciated aspect of it is that if you're not a good communicator and you're not interesting, it doesn't matter if you have the secret to life 45 minutes into your podcast. No one's going to make it to it. You know, like, so it has to be engaging. I think one of the things that I've done, if I can take credit for anything, is I've taken a very dry medical thing. Yeah, hard, difficult to understand, and I've made it fun somehow. And, you know, and that's a weird mix. And I don't think that's what most people wouldn't think to do that. They would think that there's an appropriateness that maybe goes away. But like,
brazen. I think you're brazen.
Is that what it is?
I appreciate it.
I think I'm just old and I don't really give a crap what anybody else thinks. But I grew up in a time where entertainment was, you know, it needed to be entertaining or you'd shut it off. And I think the same way about this. And I, at the same time, feel very responsible for the people listening, you know, so I don't want to just give them bad information so that I have an episode. And then that goes into, well, how do you make a podcast over and over again? I interview people who are just regular people. Like I avoid like the plague anybody in the diabetes space who has a name for themselves, unless I really know them and I legit know that this is something I want to do, because people come off as practiced then. And they have little sound bites they give, and they're trying to direct you back to their Instagram. And I'm like you've been very kind a couple times while we were talking. If you like inserted the name of the podcast, like I don't care. Yeah, like I really don't care if nobody listening to this comes and listens. I do. But
I want anyone that listens to this that have type 1. I need you to stop when you finish this episode. I need you to go straight to the Juicebox Podcast. I need you to look up all these basic episodes that he's talking about with Jenny. And you just start at square one and listen to all of them. And then you can go back and listen to Scott go on and on and on about whatever with whoever. Then that's great too. But
listen.
The Defining Diabetes, the Diabetes Basics, like all those series, those are essential listening for someone managing type 1 diabetes. Like there is nowhere else you're going to get this information. There's no books. It's your blog. And like you said, like so many of these other diabetes blogs, they're great. They're fun. And there's a lot of commiseration going on. But there's not a lot of actual real, like, no, if you do this, it will get better.
Yeah. And it's and it works for adults too, which is, you know, I hear a lot of times when people are like, oh, well, you're the father of a kid with diabetes. I thought this was for kids. And it's not. It's for anybody using insulin.
Any diabetic that's been diagnosed for any number of years. I've been doing this for 4 years and was still like, oh my gosh, how did I not already know this? Why did no one tell me this? This sounds familiar from when she got diagnosed 4 years ago, but no one's ever brought it up since then. Like, that's terrible. But like, and like you said too, if you're waiting to go see your doctor, we go every 6 months. If I wait to change doses until every 6 months, that's why she's been mismanaged for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Like, you can't wait that long. Like, there's so much there.
Well, I'm
going to wrangle you in though. We got to talk about masturbation.
All right. Well, what I do it. I'm just kidding. So
diabetic masturbation, Scott.
I have a bustling Facebook page. It's a private Facebook page for the podcast. It has 15,000 plus people in it, talking about, diabetes and living with it and management of it and that kind of stuff. And I very much run that Facebook page the way I talk. I don't look at it. I don't care what people say to each other. If you say something that insults somebody else, you better figure it out amongst yourselves because you're adults and I'm not your mom. And I don't. And so,
but how beautiful is it? I don't see a lot of that going on your page. People are fairly respectful and also quick to be like, no, we don't do that here. Sorry.
I like it when people step up and go, Scott would not like this if he saw it, because one of my rules for the Facebook page says, if this becomes a pain in my ass, I will close it. Like, I really,
I'm done. I'm out. I don't blame you. I haven't started it myself because it's too intimidating to me. So like, this is incredible.
So whereas other people might start a Facebook page thinking this will feed my podcast and I just don't care. Like, it works because
not worth it.
Yeah. And it works because I'm hands off. I run that Facebook page the way I parent my kids and I live my life. Like, you'll figure it out. Like, you don't need me. And now listen, if somebody says something terrible or a scammer comes in or something like that, I take care of that right away. But if people disagree, or like, oh, this is uncomfortable, I'm like, well, you either better be comfortable or look away because it seems okay for these people who are interested in it. But anyway, I watch these people have these great conversations. And one day somebody says, oh my God, I just realized my son's blood sugar goes up when his bedroom door is locked. And hundreds and hundreds of comments later, I was like, this is an episode of the podcast, right?
Oh yeah.
So I get Jenny on to do a variables episode, and I wish you knew, like, I don't pre-plan. So I'm like, Jenny, hey, today let's talk about orgasms. And she's such a lovely woman, and she's from the Midwest, and she's like, oh, okay. And I was like, this is going to be more fun listening to her be uncomfortable than anything else. But so I watched these people talking. And then it all started making sense. But then Jenny and I talked through it, and we even kind of found more like if you're going to masturbate at home and you're an adult, right? You probably just think like, I'm going to grab a towel and I'm going to use a little bit of this, and I might grab a vibrator, or I'm going to use my hand. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, easy.
But if you're a 15-year-old boy and there are people in your house, you're like, oh,
there is stealth.
There's
adrenaline. There's excitement.
All that starts hitting you, and that makes your blood sugar go up. And then lovely, like, adult women in the group came in and said, hey, I got to tell you, it doesn't work the way for me, but I get a little low afterwards. And, right. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. So then, I guess like I'm sorry, like, I'm such a child in my heart. Like, when I hear hormone, I think of like a joke of when I was 12 of how do you make a hormone. And when I think of girls masturbating, I start thinking of like weird euphemisms, like flicking your bean and stuff like that. And I get all like giddy inside like a small child. Anyway, and then I start like, I'm trying not to be creepy, but the thought of girls, and jerking off is my favorite euphemism for female masturbation because it seems like it doesn't fit. Anyway, the point is when they go to do that, you get that build up, obviously, but then the release comes maybe a bit of relaxation, and people don't recognize that some of your insulin need can come from stress. So if you don't have all the vigor of intercourse that might bring your blood sugar down, because that's another thing we talk about, with adults having sex, like, it hits men differently than women. They have food by their bedside. Like, there's all this stuff. But so if you just kind of cruise into it like an adult, and you've had a stressful day and you bang one out real quick and you relax, your blood sugar might start to go down. And they might not expect that because you think about excitement. Well, shouldn't it go up? Well, if I'm a 15-year-old boy looking for a quiet room, I might be like, oh my God, I saw this girl on Instagram and I really need to go find a private place to be, like that, those impacts will be different. So stress, anxiety, those things impact blood sugar.
All cause hormones. Insulin is a hormone. Like, it just was like I had never considered it. Listening to that this morning was like, oh my gosh, of course.
And it doesn't even have to be hormone.
Of course it's an effect.
Because a hot shower, a hot shower could bring your blood sugar down. And some people will say, oh, hot showers make my blood sugar fall. Well, maybe that's the case. Or maybe you're all uptight and, you know, maybe you're an uptight person and you have a basal rate of 1.5 an hour. And when you relax, that basal rate's too heavy and it makes your blood sugar.
It's too much. Yeah.
And my point is you're never going to really know. So instead of trying to figure it all out, just know where to look, see it happen, recognize a pattern, and then, you know, make an adjustment afterwards. Like, you know, maybe you need a snack before you do your thing. Or maybe you can't have a meal and then jump right into the shower. Like, you know, like little stuff like, because you got all this active insulin. Like the point is that I don't know. And I can't say something definitive that fits in a nice bullet point list that's going to make your life with diabetes better. But I can have conversations with people so they can bring up what's happening to them. We can think it through the best we can. And maybe you'll find some sameness in that and it'll help you. Like, that's how I think about it.
But I love that because I think that's all it is going, hey, masturbating, it might affect your blood sugar. Your menstrual cycle might affect your blood sugar. You might, because you're cyclical, you're going to maybe notice some patterns with your menstrual cycle, with your blood sugar and how you manage your diabetes and masturbation. And I also love even bringing that up because it really also shows, like, there's a lot of topics that you've covered on your podcast that are somewhat taboo. Like, if you go into your doctor's office and go, I would like to use illegal drugs or drink alcohol, and how would I manage my blood sugar? They're going to go, A, I don't know, and B, just don't do that.
Yeah, right. They're going to give
you.
So
I like that you were like, no, let's actually talk about it. Like, that's like, these are things that actually happen. So let's just talk about it.
I have had amazing conversations with people who are just, I interviewed a lady 2 months ago and just went up recently. She's 62 years old. She said diabetes forever. And she has cancer, blood cancer, I think. Had a wonderful conversation with her. I've also had a conversation with a person who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes during a heroin bender. I think all of those conversations are real. Like, to pretend that people with diabetes don't use heroin is ridiculous. To think that they might not drink is silly. Like, so you can't just talk to people about the parts that are polite company stuff, because it's not really the answer. Like, they need a real answer. Now, I'm not telling you to use heroin, and if you commingled what I just said with that idea, then I think you're insane.
No,
you know,
that's not it.
But I mean, I've had conversations with people who are bipolar and have type 1. And how about after having a number of conversations, hundreds and hundreds, I start hearing the word bipolar in people's like lines. And then I start thinking, is bipolar disorder an autoimmune disease, or does it have any link to that? Because people with type 1 quite frequently have other autoimmune issues, or in the family, maybe. Right.
Totally.
And I wouldn't have like put 2 and 2 together like that had I not had so many of these conversations and met. Like, listen, quirky people are fun, you know, like I'll tell you what, for years, I've been trying to get somebody on the show who's been in prison. And I don't mean like over the weekend, you know, because like they got caught in a bar
with type 1. Yeah, I want to listen to that.
I want to talk to somebody who's been inside and had diabetes. I want to know what that's like. And it's a hard thing. I've had 4 people booked for it, and they always drop off. And it's usually to do with,
they end up back in prison.
There's concerns about their parole usually.
Oh, okay,
They don't want to tell stories that maybe put them back in trouble. So I keep trying and I keep trying. But I mean, I have one up today about a woman came on to talk about her eating disorder. Listen, I got an email once from somebody who said, I was assaulted in college. I was raped, and it impacted my diabetes care. And I want to come on the show and talk about it. And I thought, my God, there can't be an hour conversation about her impact over control. We're going to end up talking about sexual assault, right? Yeah. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, let's do it. And so she got on, and before we started, I was like, are you sure about this? I was like, because I am not sure. I'm me. I'm going to say something stupid during this at some point. You know, she goes, totally. I listened to this show. You're going to be okay. Let's do it. And we did it. And she thanked me when it was over. And she's like, this is terrific. Put this up just like this. And I said, oh, okay. And then I don't blink an eye. Like, I know some people might think like, oh God, I'm going to get like canceled, or I don't know what you guys do to people online anymore, but I don't think about it that way. I'm like, this is going to help somebody. And, you know, listen, it's in the title. When it starts, I'll say, look, we're going to talk about this today. You know, I'm not a person who understands the idea of being triggered by something, but I do know that some people are. And so I want them to know. But at the same time, you can't spend so much time papering things with, oh my gosh, be careful this and be careful that. And don't, because you'll never get to the damn content. You'll always be apologizing for it. And this stuff happens.
This is another reason why I feel like your podcast is so useful and what we're missing in a lot of ways in this community.
Well, we're not missing it. I put it out 4 days a week. What do you think of that? It's right here.
Exactly.
I am a whore. I pump my content out like crazy. But I'm very proud that I don't think that there's, you might find an episode that you don't jive with somebody, or maybe there'll be a time where I talk a little too much or not enough or whatever. But overall, I don't think there's a clunker in that podcast. Like, I don't think there's an episode you'll turn on and go like, this is a waste of my time. So
everyone is interesting. I learned something from every single one of them. And that's ultimately why I love having mine, because I hope the same. I hope that people can take away something from even if it's not applicable to them. I hope if someone's made it this far in this episode that doesn't have type 1, that they learned something new today and still had something that applies to them personally, even without type 1 diabetes.
April, my listen through rate is 93%. And if there aren't a lot of people still listening, I'm insulted. And I wish they were still listening so I could tell them to go to hell. The rest of you who stayed, you had no choice.
I love that.
You had no choice to stay and listen. I'm terribly interesting. But I have a couple of vagina questions because I feel like you're going to kick me off in a second. So
absolutely.
All right. Labia, is it majora and minor, or is it minora? Because a menorah makes me think of that thing.
Labia majora and labia minora.
But isn't a menorah the thing you put candles in at the high holiday?
Also that.
Why would they do
Spelled
that?
differently.
But why? It's terrible. So, all right. So majora, is that the...
external lips.
Okay. So let me back up. Some ladies have like nice, like smooth presentation, and some ladies have a more external presentation. Those are the majora?
Yeah. It just... Each snowflakes. Vulvas are like snowflakes. Each one is different. Each one has different measurements and things. Some have longer outer lips, longer inner lips, longer both. None. Snowflakes.
Okay. If you have bigger outer lips, do you need more lubrication?
It depends on you. Some people really like naturally lubricate super well. I always tend to lean on like, you know what? If you're worried about add lube, it rarely is a bad idea.
Couldn't it get caught like in a fold over situation and be unpleasant?
Absolutely.
That happens.
Like, and my joke too with like, I'm pretty not against plastic surgery. Like, I'm pretty against plastic surgery in that area. Like, it bothers me that this has become such a mainstream thing because it is so unnecessary the majority of the time. But my joke is like, if your labia is getting stuck in your zipper, like maybe you could potentially lose a little bit of it and be okay still, you know?
You can get your wings clipped, you're saying? Now, is there feeling in that? Like would you?
That's the problem. There are nerve endings in every single bit of that tissue. And so anytime you go in and start snipping around, you could potentially take off portions of the clitoris by messing around with that, because people always think of the clitoris as that little teeny tiny bud that's under the clitoral hood.
The hard part.
Like your dorsal nerves go down into like your labia or what's covering that other portion of your clitoris. Oh. So you have to be really careful when you start messing with that. And unfortunately, doctors are not as well informed about this because really it's been only in the last few years that they've even agreed on the anatomical terms for all of this. Most medical textbooks do not teach what a normal length is, what a normal depth is. And so you may be dealing with a doctor who's just practicing based on like what they feel like.
All right. I don't like that. Keep your lips. Now the menorah,
your lips.
Are those the little ones towards the hole more? Like the interior more?
Yeah, that would be the menorah. Yes.
I'm testing myself because I've been married for 25 years. I haven't seen a vagina in a while. So now the thing at the top, the mons pubis, is that where the hair grows?
Yes.
Yes. Why is that got why does everything have a weird name?
I don't know.
How do we get How do we get dick and balls and you get mons pubis? That's really ridiculous.
Great.
Hold on a second.
Great questions.
I have other
Although you have a frenulum and a shaft and
please don't say frenulum. Names. That's the part that connects the
testicles, vas deferens.
Yeah, that's interior. That's inside stuff. I don't care about the inside part. I just care about what I can see. All right, I have other questions.
Yes.
Is squirting real, or are ladies peeing themselves? What is happening?
Absolutely real. So squirting is typically fluid coming out of the Skene's glands. So the same glands that lubricate the vagina can also have a buildup of fluid with stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
And that buildup of fluid through stimulation, which typically is internal stimulation, which we used to kind of call the G-spot, which is really kind of the backside of the clitoris. Typically that type of stimulation can help build up fluid in those Skene's glands. And then when females ejaculate, that's what they're ejaculating, is this lubricating fluid. If they do, it can be learned, but not for everybody. Just depends on the body.
You just said something fascinating to me. The G-spot is it's like knocking on the back door of the clitoris?
Yep, totally.
So the hook finger thing is real.
Absolutely, it's real.
I figured that out. I knew that. Hey, how
long have you been married? Come on,
I know it's right. I'm trying to be entertaining a little bit too. What else do I have? Okay, I have other things. I only have pornography to go by. But when guys look too big to be real, where does it go? Where does it go?
You're talking about penises?
No, I'm talking about length. Like where does it disappear to? Like like the old joke of like it looks like it's in her stomach kind of feeling, but where does it really go?
Okay, but vaginal tenting is real. Like that totally happens, and you would be amazed at, especially if like, let's say you've maybe overused some of these areas of your body. They are all capable of stretching. You have to think that like kids come out of there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like this whole area was built to stretch and accommodate.
Right.
And so like to a certain degree, you can stretch and accommodate.
Okay. So when something that, okay, I'm just giving away that I don't have a giant penis, but when something that big looks like it's disappearing, it's still inside of the where? It's inside the like
vagina.
Really? Dear Lord.
Absolutely.
Thing is,
yeah, because your cervix is nice and tight. Like you're not poking up further past there. And like I said, stretch and accommodate is like the skill of the vagina.
The cervix is the thing, like if you go too deep, feels like it's almost like a little butthole inside, but stronger, right?
Yep.
See, I know.
That's a great way to describe it.
Thank you. It's very, very, I'm a real poet about this.
But it's interesting. Like even your cervix, it pulls forward and it can tuck back depending on where you're at in your menstrual cycle. So it moves. It hangs down in the vaginal canal. People think it's the end of the road. It's actually hanging down into the tunnel.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, how come some of the fluid looks clear, but some of it's creamy sometimes?
So your cervical fluid actually changes as you progress through your menstrual cycle. So we menstruate. Mm-hmm. We have a couple days of dry. We then start with crumbly. So this is cervical fluid that's maybe not super great for sperm. Mm-hmm. We progress from crumbly and dry and kind of sticky to creamier, more lotion-like mucus to suddenly we go to very, very fluid, watery, egg white, almost fluid. That fluid is really conducive to sperm. They can live in that. They love that crap. And they can live there for up to 5 days. And then after you ovulate, you'll taper off with what your cervical fluid typically have a period of dry. And then you go back into your you menstruate and you bleed.
Okay. Fascinating. Why do boobs get different during periods? They get more
hormones.
Sensitive. That's hormones?
Yeah, it's all hormones. So estrogen, I believe it's estrogen that increases boob size, if I remember right.
But also sensitivity, right?
Oh yeah, totally. And you may have some people who can't have their nipples touch one single itty bitty bit when they're menstruating. And then 2 weeks later when they're ovulating, they want you to bite them.
Girls are weird. That's all. It's not your fault, but Jesus God, that's a lot of information.
Well, okay, but you have to think coming from a male perspective, you have a 24-hour hormone cycle. So at 11 o'clock in the morning every day, your hormones should be exactly the same. We have a 28 to 32 day hormone cycle. Yeah. So we're only the same critters 12 days out of the year.
No, I've noticed. I've said to my wife, is there a reason we can't put an indicator light on your forehead that says you're how you're feeling so that I don't come at you from the wrong angle and say the wrong thing? Yeah. And I
think we would all like that.
I don't mean it teasingly. It's just I don't ascribe fault to it. Obviously, it's the natural cycle of things. But my goodness, you're wow, there's so much happening. I genuinely have empathy. Oh, yeah. And then on top of that, boys, constantly chasing you around trying to find your vagina. That's really our like main focus. It's fascinating that I'm 50, I have my children, and it is hard not to think about still. Like, oh yeah, it's difficult not to just like every girl you walk past, you're just like there's an internal thing in your body and you just think like, oh my God, that one's cute. That one's cute. This one isn't, but I don't care. Like, it's a real weird thing the way our brains work.
I think you come at life with a certain degree of curiosity too. So I don't even know that that's always sexual in nature for everybody. I think when you're a curious person and you want to know all the things about all the things, of course you're like, what do you smell like?
So you're right about that, because Arden and I, when we walk past a person, anybody, our questions or impulses to say, did you notice that whatever, are always exactly the same. That's interesting. And we're just similar people.
Yeah, I think we try to make so many of these things like weird or sexual or only boys or like, other stuff. And I really think that just comes from being a generally curious person.
You've helped me. Thank you. All right. Do you have questions written down that we didn't get to?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I always ask everybody how they like to manage their period, but well, I think you're excluded from that team.
I have a little basket on the bowl, right? And it's got different size like absorbencies in it. I do know that I restock them for the girls at my house. Yeah, that's all I know about that. Good. We change the sheets from lighter colors sometimes. Yes. Right?
That's important.
That's a good one. We make sure there's like spray and wash around the house.
I love it.
That's all I have. You're not really married to a woman has called you and said, "Hey, take these upstairs and get me another pair." Then you're a real married person.
Absolutely. 100%. I love that.
What do people usually say? I'm going to let you.
It totally depends on the person. Some people manage. I mean, there's so many different alternative ways to manage your period these days. So like we've gone so far beyond like pads and tampons. There's menstrual cups, menstrual discs, period panties, sea sponges. I mean, free bleeding. Like there's a whole world out there of ways to manage. And then on top of it, like there's some of the rictuals of like, when I'm menstruating, I like to drink this or eat this, and this helps with this, or this is how I manage my cramping with this, or, so
does that stuff work?
It's a cool
milk thistle.
And everyone's different.
Like all right. I see. You're less helpful than I was when you asked me questions about diabetes. I'm like, I don't know. You got to try.
Exactly.
I appreciate you asking me to do this. I'm sorry if I took over. I don't really know how to, I'm not a good guest on people's podcasts.
You're fantastic. I think this has been a really beneficial conversation. I hope so. I hope anyone who's listening to this, especially with type 1 or even managing a type 1, will have a little bit more insight into thoughts to have around it, things to consider, right? So curiosities to have around different things that could potentially make it easier to manage.
No, I appreciate that. And by the way, on a more personal level, I appreciate that my show has been valuable to you and that you were very kind when you reached out.
Huge.
That was lovely.
Life-changing.
Oh, see, you're gonna make me feel weird. But I mean, I'm stuck in the middle because I want you to say nice things, but then I get that goofy feeling in my chest when you say something nice. Yeah.
Scott, I love you deeply, and you have saved me and my child's life. So just know that you're an important member of the Davis family now.
Thank you. I really do appreciate it. I really do. I mean, that it helps anybody, listen, not to be boring at the end, but you don't start a podcast thinking it's going to become incredibly popular. And when it happens, there's an amount of time where you're like, you want to make sure you don't freak out because you're like, I just need to do what I'm doing because what I'm doing works. You don't want to examine it too closely. And when I got into the situation where people were saying things like you just said, and they send emails all day long and they post online to tell you, you don't want to minimize anyone's feelings, but sometimes it's weird for me. Like sometimes at 11 o'clock, you are the 13th person who's told me I've saved your life. And I don't feel like it's not trite to me, but I'm tired. And sometimes I'm like, oh, thank you. you email back and you're like, I'm glad you like the podcast, but I don't know what to say sometimes.
Isn't that the best thing that we can say? Because I get the same thing. Like people will share really, really intimate and deep things with me about, what like they've run with something I've said that has been so helpful for them. And same, like it's overwhelming to me sometimes. It also motivates me and keeps me going.
Yeah.
So it's like gas in the tank every time, but it is also overwhelming to like take on. And also like the trust that people have in you can be very overwhelming.
Yeah. You just said something interesting, like the motivation part of it. It's not that you're not motivated. It's just like my podcast is a full-time job. I work at it 6 days a week. If you hear an episode, I put 10 or 12 hours worth of my effort into you hearing that hour. Right.
Yes.
And having ads on the show is actually, it's monetarily it's good, but it's good for me because I have to put an episode out when I said I was going to, and
totally,
and it has to be good or people will stop listening. And if people stop listening, now I've sold an ad to somebody that they won't be served on. Like it feeds.
Oh, I'm in your same boat, but on Instagram. Yeah. I hear you. And it is a fine line and it is a balance because I've got to create enough fantastic content that it stands on its own, but I can justify doing sponsored content and advertisements because I want to make sure to meet the need of my advertisers. I also want to make sure those advertisers are serving my clientele.
Yes.
But I think you've also done that really well. It's funny. I was already on Dexcom and Omnipod, but every time I listen to the podcast, I'm like, man, if we weren't using the Dexcom and Omnipod, we would be by now.
My favorite email came from a grown man that just said, the subject line was Omnipod. And the body of the email literally just said, okay, fine, you win. I'll get an Omnipod. And I thought that's hilarious.
You broke them down one by one.
It really is. Honestly, I'm 50 years old. Like, you try to imagine that when I was in high school, everything that I'm doing right now, it wasn't just not a thought. It literally didn't exist. Like nothing that I do right now was real when I was deciding what to do in the world. It's very strange, and then you find this space where you're helping people. And you always kind of have a quarter of an eye out to the future. Like, what's going to change? Like, how do I have to shift with this if it shifts? And what do I do? It's, I don't know. Hopefully, how much longer can I do this? I always say to people, like, you're going to listen to a 65-year-old guy who doesn't have diabetes tell you about diabetes. Like, at some point, it's going to end, right? But it's growing still. We just hit a major milestone the other day. The show got its 4 millionth total download. Which was just amazing because it took, for anybody who thinks about putting content out and you want to be super, like, I don't know, you feel like you want to be successful at it. I had more downloads last month than I had in the first 2 years of the podcast combined. And it took 4 years to get to 1 million. But then once I got to 1 million, 2 million came quickly, 3 million came faster, 4 came faster than that. It's not just about being there and tricking people to come see a thing. There actually has to be something there for them when they get there. So.
Yes. And you're providing that. You absolutely are. So if you're listening to this, guys, go head over to the Juicebox Podcast. Go find the Juicebox Facebook group. He even has an Instagram. You don't do much over there, but you have one.
I'm 50. What am I going to do with it? I try to put up like when episodes are coming out, and that's not what people want from Instagram. So, if I get into a bikini, which I think is how Instagram works, I don't think I don't really feel like anybody's going to want that.
Have you tried? We don't know.
No, I haven't. And I'm pretty certain nobody wants that. So I have it and it's there. Listen, I'll tell you this. You're already a podcast listener. Just search Juicebox Podcast Type 1 Diabetes. That's it. You'll find it wherever you listen. If you want transcripts, they're at juiceboxpodcast.com for every episode. That was another thing I didn't understand. Like, people started asking for transcripts of the show. I have listeners who don't listen to the show. They read it.
Yeah, they just read it.
I don't understand that, but God bless them. And like the whole thing. So it's there. I'll tell you this. My daughter's A1C has been between 5.2 and 6.2 for over 7 years. She does not have any diet restrictions. I think if you listen to that podcast, you could easily have an A1C in the 6s. And if you really wanted to work at it, you could have it in the 5s. And I stand behind that. None of it's medical information. Like I have, I do that thing at the beginning. I'm like, I can do it in my sleep. Ready? Watch this. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Please always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin, which is just something I said in episode 11 that resonated with
Which is a fantastic disclaimer for this episode here on the Vagina Blog Podcast. Please take that into account.
Right. Listen, not only am I not a doctor, I might be a moron. So grain of salt. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, April.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, for being here today. I so appreciate your time.
It really was a pleasure. I swear to you, I might start answering more of these emails. And not just deleting them. Would you please call my delete? We would very much like to delete. I'm like, no, delete, leave me alone. I'm busy. Vagina. What's this now? That's how you got me. So if anybody's interested, write vagina in the email. I'll at least read it.
There you go. Thank you so much.
Of course. Hey, how about a huge thanks to April for inviting me on the Vagina Blog podcast and for letting me run the audio here on the Juicebox Podcast. I hope you guys had fun listening. If you're interested in April's podcast, check it out. Again, it's called the Vagina Blog Podcast. It's all about vaginas. And I don't know. I've never heard it. I don't know what else it's about. I'm sorry. But I bet if you had a vagina, you'd like it. I also want to thank Dexcom for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast and remind you to go to dexcom.com/juicebox. Go say hello to Dexcom. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast.